Monday, September 26, 1983 was a pretty insignificant day in human history. But it almost wasn't. On that day, at a military bunker near Moscow, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov had a difficult decision to make. He was in charge of the team that supervised the Soviet Union's missile warning system during an especially tense period between them and the US. And in the shadow of this uncertainty, on September 26, 1983, Stanislav Petrov received the worst news possible. The Soviet missile defense system had detected that the United States had launched 5 missiles towards the Soviet Union. It was Petrov's job to evaluate the danger and to report his findings up the chain of command. So, he assessed the situation. He found it weird that the US would only send 5 missiles their way, and he was concerned that the Soviet Union's ground-based radar systems hadn't detected the attacks. He concluded that the warnings must be a false alarm and didn't warn his military superiors about the danger. He made a snap judgment, but he was right. The warnings were a false alarm caused by a Soviet satellite confusing sunlight reflected off a cloud for missiles. For a moment, Stanislav Petrov had the fate of the entire world in his hands, and that is terrifying. Speaking of Armageddon, Fallout New Vegas is a game that takes place a couple of centuries after a nuclear war devastates the US. It's set in and around Las Vegas, which was blown up so bad it became New Vegas. 3 major post-apocalyptic forces are trying to take over the Mojave Wasteland, the area surrounding Vegas. The first is the New California Republic, a liberal democracy modeled on the pre-war USA. The second is Caesar's Legion, a slaver society led by a ruthless god king. Finally, there's Mr. House, the mysterious guy who runs the Vegas Strip with the help of his police robots. You play as the Courier, a package delivery guy who's just been shot execution-style by Matthew Perry. You survive the attack, track him down, and get caught up in his attempt to coup Mr. House. Most of the game after that is just the Courier making preparations and establishing alliances before the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, the battle that will decide which of the big factions will take control of the Mojave. Honestly, the game's story is really densely layered, and I'm not sure I can really do it any justice by just telling you the plot. Trust me, though, Fallout New Vegas is awesome. It was one of the first games I ever owned, and I will defend that game to the death. I love it so much. It's this super thoughtful war game and political thriller, and naturally, it's all about the messed up ways that the world can victimize you. This theme is baked into the game's DNA. Through terminals and notes, you can learn a lot about the people who existed before the nuclear war, their issues, their regrets, the funny little things they did. It's a very cool snapshot of lives before the Fallout apocalypse, but it's also eerie because you know how every single one of these stories end. And the world of post-war Vegas is similarly brutal. Almost every character you meet has some horror story about the Legion sweeping over their town and enslaving everyone they love, or the NCR murdering a bunch of their people and forcing them off their land, or some other violent misfortune. Hell, in the game's final DLC, Lonesome Road, you're introduced to the Tunnelers, extremely aggressive subterranean mutants. And the game tells you, by the way, these guys breed rapidly, can take down the strongest enemies in the base game, and it's only a matter of time before they reach Vegas. That's your last impression of the game. Everyone you've met is probably going to be eaten by lizard people.
Later.
This emphasis on the fragileness of life isn't just set dressing either. The game spends a ton of energy showing you the visceral cruelty of the setting. Early in the game, you're likely to encounter this town called Nipton. The town's practically abandoned and surrounded by fires and mounds of skeletons, and there's this weird guy hanging around the outskirts yelling about some lottery. Once you reach a trigger point halfway through town, you run into a creepy wolfman and his troops. He's with Caesar's Legion. For a lot of players, this will be their first time encountering them. And he proudly tells you all about the weird, methodical way that they massacred the town of people, for no reason other than as a show of force.
I told them that when legionaries are disloyal, some are punished, the others made to watch. And I announced the lottery. Each clutched his ticket, hoping it would set him free. Each did nothing, even when loved ones were dragged away to be killed.
The game really treats this scene with the gravity it deserves. It feels sadistic enough that it reminds us of the worst things that people have done to each other. You get to see firsthand the way that these characters have suffered. All around you, there are crucified lottery participants. They can't be saved, only mercy killed. You can even meet the two only survivors. The first is the weird guy from before, the second is hiding out in one of the abandoned stores with his legs smashed up. He is rightfully pissed, and all he wants is some pain meds. As a really mean touch, the game even has two separate quests which only require you to visit an NCR outpost, tell some officers about what happened in Nipton, and watch their horrified reaction. And I'm not saying all this to give the impression that New Vegas is some gratuitously edgy game. My point is that the emphasis is on how much it sucks to be a bit player in history, and how painful it can be to live in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's not edgy, it's just honest. That's the history of the world, innocent people being brutalized by invasions and global catastrophes. This game loves reminding you that no matter who you are, where you are, or how you live, you're never entirely safe. Every facet of it, from the theming to the plot to the characters, contributes to a game world where everyone feels like they're one unlucky day away from their own personal apocalypse. Everyone except for the player, 'cause you're the courier. When you talk, everyone in the world stops to listen to you. And if you want to freeze time, take a bunch of drugs, and punch a hive of giant wasps to death, nobody's stopping you. It's one of the things I love about this game. It's just shamelessly a power fantasy. Of course, power fantasies aren't an uncommon thing in the gaming world. It's practically an RPG genre convention. Hell, a lot of the time when someone describes a game as a power fantasy, they mean it as a criticism. They're saying that it's too easy, or chauvinistic, or that the difficulty balance is screwy. But that's not the type of power fantasy I'm talking about, not the type that New Vegas excels at. The power fantasy I'm talking about is more like a security fantasy. The fantasy of being so unquestionably powerful that you're basically immune from the arbitrary, disastrous bullshit of the real world, victimizing you or anyone you care about. New Vegas achieves this effect in a lot of ways. The gameplay makes you seem like a beast with how powerful you can become. The game has a ton of different skills you can advance, and enough skill points are provided that, by the end game, most will be maxed out. At that point, the courier becomes a comically hyper-competent protagonist. They can perform delicate surgery, repair an elevator, pick any lock, win any argument, master any weapon. You basically become Batman. Too smart, too talented, too good at everything to ever be caught off guard or put in any danger. It's an extremely satisfying reward for leveling up. Most of the actual character's specialization comes in the form of perks, which grant unique miscellaneous benefits every other level, like the ability to knock enemies down with a punch, or to bypass armor with shotguns, or to kiss other men on the lips. The perk system doesn't just give character customization some depth, it often provides some really kick-ass benefits. Adding to the courier's OP-ness, there is also VATS, a very effective stat-based alternative to the first-person shooter combat, reminiscent of the combat back in Fallout's early isometric days. And there are some uncommon, extremely overpowered weapons, like the Fat Man, a shoulder-mounted mini-nuke launcher. This hilarious thing can pretty much one-hit kill anything in the game, meaning that if you put in the effort to find both the launcher and ammo for it, no interaction is truly unwinnable. And the game has some very powerful consumables. They can make you invisible, slow down time, significantly strengthen VATS, and more. Like with the Fat Man, if you make the effort to collect these, the game rewards you with some extremely generous boosts. The point is, all these gameplay mechanics contribute to the game having a very high power ceiling, so if you put the effort, the courier can become a very strong protagonist. The game is a power fantasy in the most literal sense. You get to pretend to be a very physically powerful person, and it's satisfying as hell. And this power fantasy vibe extends to the game's actual narrative. The first town you visit after starting the game is Goodsprings. You find out that the town is being threatened by a gang of escaped prisoners, and immediately you're tasked with deciding the town's fate. Do you want to save them or sell them out to the gang? From then on, you're pretty much enforcing your political will across the Mojave. Essentially, you get to be the Mojave Wasteland's very own Stanislav Petrov, but for hundreds of different characters, just bouncing around, deciding the fates of every town you encounter. The game's biggest strength, and I think a lot of New Vegas fans will agree, is the massive variety of ways you can affect the Mojave Wasteland. The game has dozens of quests with very diverse branching paths and significant story consequences. If you want to roleplay as a courier who wants to make a lot of positive change in the Mojave, there's a lot you can do. Rescuing a family from slavery, single-handedly saving a struggling refugee camp. Playing the game can make you feel like you're actually making the world better, in the part of the brain that tricks you into thinking video games are real life. The game gives you the power to do a lot of good. Or to not. The power fantasy carries through until the last moment of the game. The final quest is to fight in the second battle of Hoover Dam, to install your preferred faction into political power. With this game, the player not only feels powerful in the literal sense, because of what a badass the courier is, they also get to have power over the game's story and setting. It ticks the same boxes as playing with Legos or dolls when we were kids. We get to watch a story play out where we control most of the major narrative beats. It's fun and comforting, you get to use your imagination, and you don't have to worry about the story veering off into territory you're not comfortable with. As a package, New Vegas is a game that knows how to make you feel powerful in the right ways, and it makes a very cool contrast to the extremely bleak setting of the game. I joked earlier about the courier basically being Batman, but honestly, they're awesome for the exact same reasons. It's extremely satisfying to watch a character kick ass and make meaningful decisions in a world that's being held together by duct tape. When you watch Batman, you feel good, like the people of Gotham have the savior they desperately need, and you can trick yourself into thinking that the world is a little bit safer than it actually is. Not only is this also true of New Vegas, but the way New Vegas allows you to control the game's story makes the illusion of power even stronger. And that's what I mean by calling this game a security fantasy. New Vegas is able to successfully emulate a world just like ours, a world where people are extremely vulnerable to the terrible things life can throw at you, and then it lets you play as a protagonist who floats above it all, going around doing whatever you want on your own time, and always the way you want it done. It speaks so much to New Vegas' strength as an RPG. The game is so flexible, so immersive, with so many potential avenues for character progression, it makes it incredibly easy to suspend your disbelief and convince yourself that you really are as powerful as you feel. Obviously, it's all just pretend, but you really shouldn't discount how good a little pretend security can feel. Fallout New Vegas is a game with legs. Nerds like me have been talking about it for, God, I guess over a decade at this point. And a lot of the game's sustained cultural relevancy comes from the way that it exploits human fears and insecurities about our own powerlessness. It's comforting to tell ourselves that we're like Stanislav Petrov in the Soviet bunker, that if we make the right decisions and act responsibly, our fate is in our own hands. This feels especially true now. Humans have built ourselves a pretty sturdy house of cards. We've explored, colonized, and exploited almost every corner of the planet. We've built global communication networks and advanced warning systems for every disaster. You start to feel invincible. But the reality is, none of us are like Stanislav Petrov on September 26th. We're just the little skeletons in Nipton. We are products of our circumstances first, everything else second, and our circumstances could get worse very quickly. As far as we know, our generation's Stanislav Petrov is some amoral freak or just completely incompetent. Moral or incompetent people love making important decisions. It sucks, but this powerlessness is a reality that defines the human condition, and I don't have any solutions. I guess we just have to make the most of the parts of our lives that we can control. And don't feel lame for occasionally indulging in power fantasies. Games like Fallout New Vegas make you feel powerful, and everyone should get to feel powerful. Ultimately, the important thing is that September 26, 1983 was a completely forgettable day. Humanity bought itself some time, and that's all we can really do.
Later.